Okay.
Want me to go
Elaine.
first?
Sure.
Thank you for a very detailed report, very specific, and it was some very interesting reading, wasn't it, Mayor? But I appreciated that all the details were there. It wasn't a glossy couple pages, this is a lovely thing, and do it. So I appreciate that the extent of the report was very, very detailed down to the minutiae of little widgets, and so I appreciated that. I'm very cognizant that in our speakers that came at the very during the public comment period, all of the community speakers that spoke to this topic spoke in favor of this acquisition. The exception was our head of who was concerned about the budget, Police Officer Association. So that's why I wanted to speak with you further. So thank you for coming forward. I just wanted to get a real sense of the room, and I think that it's telling that there was that support. It is true that I have been personally affected by body cameras, and I would not be accurate if I didn't divulge that and explain that the circumstance in just a bit of detail, in that I did have a 17-year-old son who was accused of something and ended up in juvenile detention, incarcerated for 21 days, was it? As a parent who goes through that and knows that their child did not do anything and should not be there, I will tell you that that was one of the most difficult things I have ever gone through. And at that time, you spare no expense to get legal representation to try to help you and fight, and whatever you do, max out the credit cards, trying to find a way to make that happen. I will be forever grateful to Officer who now is our head of police, David Livingstone, who chose to investigate it further. And as I understand, it was when he looked at that experimental body camera and looked at the footage interviewing the accuser that he had some concerns, and so went back and asked more questions, and eventually it was found that the accusations were false, were not made, were manufactured, and it was because of that my son was given a finding of factual innocence. To that point, before that, he had been released, and they said, "You're free to go, we don't have enough proof to convict you, you're fine." But he would always have had that mark that he'd been arrested. And so I was forever grateful that our David Livingstone would take the time to look at the body camera footage and be able to go back and interview. And my son, going forward, when he writes interviews, can say there's nothing, his record is unblemished. So I want you to know I'm forever grateful as a private citizen, before I ever became on this council, that our police force, for a short time, used body cameras. So I want you to know I have trouble separating that incident from this request that we have before us today. So I've got to make sure I'm being very clear in that discussion. As I read through the material, I was concerned that it's a $1.77 million acquisition. This is not cheap. This is a chunk of change. I was gratified that it comes entirely from our forfeit assetshare program, so there's no ask from the budget to fund any of it, at least for the next 5 years. And I was encouraged by Officer Duncan that we could, in 5 years, if we don't like the experiment, we own the data, we can throw it on a server someplace and say, okay, let's go forward, let's not do it. I appreciate that there's an end game, that we aren't on the hook necessarily for hundreds of thousands ongoing, because that is a concern. I think Mary got a very valid point that it's concern after 5 years. Then what? What is our hook? And so I think some of those questions were answered in the dialogue. The fact that we have the funds right now, it doesn't deplete our entire forfeit assetshare account. It actually, we still have money there for other things, and money will come in. It is a big chunk of change, but I think that we are far enough along in the development of body cameras that probably were better to having waited this long, that maybe we get a better product and prices start to come down, and we have others who are the guinea pigs, unfortunately, for products that were not as lasting. I was concerned that we were going with one company that, and their longevity. And so I appreciate knowing that they have been around, at least in the taser market, since the 1990s, as if I understand you correctly. So there appears to be longevity with this company, because it does bother me that we have to pay all the money now. I would prefer to say, listen, we'll give you $800,000 this year, and we'll give you $300,000 next year. I mean, I would prefer to say we've got it and we'll pay you, but we'll pay it as you demonstrate. So I'll be honest, that had some concern to me. But the fact that they've been around in business, Tucson is still, I guess, happy with their contract that they've had now almost 5 years. That is worthwhile. I would say that I have to be very honest. Because of my personal experience, because and the other thing I should say too is that I'm mindful. We often sit and we have, as a city council, we have many discussions about liability, and I do think that if we can take an action that might reduce our liability, whether it be monetarily, that I think ultimately we will regain some of this expense by simply reducing maybe some of the suits and some of the accusations. I am reminded, to be very honest, as I was reading through this, a little bit of the company that I own. It's a company that deals in check fraud, and we bought the company way back when, because on the books, the bank said, well, you know, it's costing us money to manufacture these checks. But what they didn't impute was how much savings. I mean, in that instance, I'm sorry if I'm explaining this badly, but fraud losses fell from $3 million to $90,000 when we implemented this program. In some ways, I think this is similar, that it's very possible that once we have body cameras, that some of the suits or some of the actions that are taken may not come before us. And so I'm hopeful that that will mitigate some of the expense that is in this project. Anyway, I thank you for the presentation. I'm actually grateful that it was voted no several years ago, so to come back and we can have maybe even a better product, because I think ultimately now is the time, and I think we should, even though it is a big commitment, I don't think we are set back financially. I'm aware that it does require potentially one more employee at about $88,000, I think was what the report said, a year. I recognize that as an expense, but I think very likely that our gain in lack of legal action and other things, time, et cetera, will more than offset that bottom line expense to our budget. And so I am, for one, I'm in favor of this project. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Lujan-Banos.